Our next short intervention comes from Lena Wånggren, who is a research fellow in English literature at the University of Edinburgh, where she also teaches. She specialises in gender and feminist theory, late 19th century literature, and is specifically interested in feminist pedagogy, theories of intersectionality, and contemporary feminist activism. She is the co-chair of Hollaback Edinburgh, a feminist organisation which campaigns against street harassment. Thank you.
So, thanks very much for inviting me. I think Kim asked if I was a religious theologian, which I'm not. I'm basically just an atheist and a feminist academic and a feminist activist. And that's what I'll be speaking about today. I think it's a great event and a much needed event today, so I look forward to lots of discussions afterwards. So I'll be speaking about my personal experiences as well as experiences as a feminist academic and feminist activist. And I'll talk, well, as an academic, I try to be critical of ideas, knowledges, and power formations, always finding proof or arguments and encouraging my students to do the same. But of course, atheism, the belief of no religion, doesn't exist in a vacuum, but in a society with many and no religions. So I'll talk today about the role that I think that atheists have to play in fighting repression against religious minorities, highlighting the need for an intersectional and transnational feminist perspective, and a critique against oppressive institutions and practices, whether they're religious or whether they're not religious. I'll also touch upon the ways in which atheists can run the risk of, while criticizing religions for patriarchal practices, themselves reproducing and spreading misogynist and sexist views. So, religion to me, it seems, is always bound up with questions of power, and I think we have to look at the context of every religious practice in order to talk about it. I recently attended a talk by the fantastic Egyptian feminist Nawal el-Saadawi, who's pictured here. Nawal is a feminist atheist, and she believes that all religions are patriarchal. And she says that women are oppressed by all religions. And here I disagree with Nawal el-Saadawi, because, we come from different contexts. I grew up in a fairly secular country of Sweden, where I had the liberty to do whatever I want. I've never been persecuted for my non-religion, whereas Nawal el-Saadawi has been put in jail and in prison even for fighting against practices in Egypt and, for example, female genital mutilation. So we come from very different backgrounds. But I've understood throughout my life and working life and activism as well, through friends, family, and readings, that religion is not just one thing, it can be many things. As we know, and as I think we've talked a bit about, religion can be used to defend all kinds of oppression, from slavery and colonialism to various patriarchal practices. But, as we also have seen, it's also been used as a source of comfort, strength, and struggle for many people. As we've heard from some of the feminists before, religion can also work as a tool of liberation, of community, of identification, and self-worth. There are countless examples of women and men and people of all genders using religion to fight injustice. And I put up a picture of one of my favorite examples is Aline Sitoé Diatta. She's usually called the Joan of Arc of Senegal. She was a leader of a religious group in Senegal and fighting against the colonial French government. And of course, as a feminist academic, I appreciate that the first university in the world was founded by a Muslim woman. As transnational feminist Chandra Talpade Mohanty has pointed out, there's not one big monolithic universal patriarchy that looks the same everywhere, but there are many different patriarchies. Any understanding of feminist concerns and strategies must be geographically, historically, and culturally grounded. For feminist struggles not to reproduce imperialist patterns, we must criticize hegemonic Western feminisms, as she calls them, and there must be the formulation of autonomous feminist concerns and strategies. So in different contexts. And I would like to include the concept of a secular Western feminism here, because I think that atheist feminists or secular feminists sometimes pose their own beliefs as neutral or correct, as opposed to religious patriarchal practice everywhere, as in they call religious practices patriarchal elsewhere. Importantly, being an atheist does not mean that you get away from reproducing patriarchal views. And I'd like to mention the example of the famous atheist Christopher Hitchens. I'm not endorsing his views. I think he's horrible, just to make that clear. But I thought I would look at him as an example. So he has stated that organized religion, in his words, is the main source of hatred in the world. Religion is, he writes, violent, irrational, intolerant, allied to racism, tribalism, bigotry, invested in ignorance and hostile to free inquiry, contemptuous of women and coercive towards children. So that's his words. But Hitchens blamed religion for racism and for misogyny, and he neglects to see the ways in which people throughout history have used religion for good. He's widely criticized Islam specifically because he sees this religion as more than others oppressing women. Hitchens poses science against religion, claiming that science can give us an absolute truth. But as I teach my students, science is not an absolute. What is considered scientific truth or knowledge changes throughout time, and it's always bound up with questions of power. In the 19th century, which is the period in which I specialized, science was used to explain that women should not be able to enter public spaces, they shouldn't be able to work alongside men in offices, they shouldn't be able to ride bicycles or do any kind of physical exercise or mental exercise. And of course, science has also been used, or so-called science has been used to justify racial segregation, colonialism, and so on. So even Hitchens himself has used science to make sexist claims. He wrote a famous piece, which some of you may have heard about, called Women Aren't Funny, in I think 2010, 2011. He says that women aren't funny because of evolution. There are fewer female comedians, not because of patriarchal exclusion within the comedian sphere, but because of evolution. Because women don't have to be funny in order to have sex, which apparently men do. And obviously all women are heterosexual. And Hitchens is also, he's famously against abortion. He doesn't think it's a woman's right to choose what to do with her body. So, as seen in this case, I think atheists can run the risk of, while criticizing religions for patriarchal practices, themselves reproducing and spreading sexist views. So we must always look at the specific context, and this is where I consider the crucial role and responsibility of atheists and secular feminists, as well as feminists of majority religions in the UK and Europe today, in fighting oppression against religious minorities. And now, as we've heard, we always have to look at context. And in the UK today, Christians are usually not, or correct me if I'm wrong, but Christians are usually not afraid of having their churches attacked. And synagogues have been attacked in the past, but at the moment it is Muslim people and mosques and Islamic centers that are under attack. As you might know, more than half of Islamic centers and mosques in the UK have been attacked since 2001. And I hear from family and friends, as well as through my work in Hollaback, about all the discrimination, comments, everything from comments to street harassment to abuse that Muslim people have to go through, especially Muslim women. Through my work with Hollaback Edinburgh, an organization fighting street harassment, we hear stories shared by women reporting to our website, and I've put up one of these stories here, shared by one woman. She writes, 2 men started shouting at me, asking if I was a terrorist and had a bomb in my bag. One of them shouted and swore at me and threatened to slap me and rip off my hijab. More hurtful than any of their words was the silence of all those around me. Even after the men had gone and I stood crying in shock, no one came to ask if I was okay. So I think in our current society, I think clearly that women of all religions and no religions need to organize alongside each other to fight against the rise of racist and Islamophobic, and of course also anti-Semitic and so on, rhetoric and violence. To understand the complexities of oppression, I like to use the term intersectionality, which we already heard earlier. Have you heard about the term before? Yeah, good. A lot of people think it's an academic term, but it actually came from feminist activist circles in the 1960s during the civil rights movement in the US. It's basically the notion that cultural and social categories such as gender, race, class, sexuality, and religion overlap and interact on multiple levels in society. So feminism is in this way defined not only as a struggle to end patriarchy, but as Bell Hooks has defined it, a struggle to end sexist oppression, which harbors in it a struggle to end or to eradicate the ideology of domination, so to end all forms of oppression. Such an intersectional feminist critique allows us, I think, to see the complexities of oppression, to understand how religion can be used as a tool of oppression, but also of liberation in different circumstances. And it also highlights the need to fight any oppressive institutions and practices, religious or not. With an intersectional viewpoint, we see that, unlike what Christopher Hitchens may think, religion and feminism or faith are not incompatible. Sometimes they might be the opposite. You might find strength in feminism or you might find strength in your faith to leave an abusive relationship or to fight even harder. However, what I do think are incompatible are capitalism and feminism. And not so many people talk about that today, but I'd like to mention that. With bell hooks, I think that, and I quote, "We will never destroy patriarchy without questioning, critiquing, and challenging capitalism." So we not only have to smash patriarchy, but all the other interlocking systems of oppression that go hand in hand with patriarchy. To my mind, if we want to use religion to fight injustice, gender another, we must also use it to fight economic injustice. And I put up a quote by Martin Luther King, who was of course Christian, who stated in 1960 that religion must deal not just with the soul of the body, but with the soul of people, but also the body, that is to say, the material circumstances that we live in. He writes, "Any religion that professes to be concerned about the souls of men and women must also be concerned about the slums that damn them, the economic conditions that strangle them, and the social conditions that hinder them." To conclude, I think that we must, as feminists of all beliefs and none, criticize oppressive practices within religion, just as we criticize and fight against any oppressive practices. I have much more in common with socialist feminists of whatever faith or of no faith than I do with a misogynist atheist like Christopher Hitchens. As the amazing feminist Audre Lorde wrote, even though there are sometimes, and I quote, "very real difference between us of race, age, and sex," and I would add of religion, "it is not those differences between us that are separating us. It is rather our refusal to recognize those differences." So I think this is what we must do. We must come together and embrace our differences, learn from each other like we are doing today, and then work together to fight white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Thanks.